The cruelest betrayals are never the ones caught by cameras. They are the ones that happen slowly, in silence, inside a marriage everyone envies. The Mediterranean wind rolled across the terrace of the Grand Royal Hotel in Monaco, carrying the distant sound of champagne glasses clinking beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than most American homes. Flashbulbs exploded every few seconds as reporters crowded near the red carpet, shouting the same name again and again. Ethan Sterling, billionaire investor, America's youngest tech king. The golden couple of high society had arrived only an hour earlier, and already social media was drowning in photos of Ethan in his custom black tuxedo beside his elegant wife, Claire Sterling, the woman magazines once called the most graceful billionaire wife in America. But what the cameras didn't capture was the moment Claire quietly slipped away from the ballroom. No security, no assistant, no dramatic expression, just silence. Her silver heels clicked softly against the marble hallway as she held a champagne glass she no longer wanted. The gala music faded behind her with every step. Earlier that evening, Ethan had promised her only 20 minutes. I just need to speak with investors, Claire. But 20 minutes had turned into 2 hours. Again, Claire stopped near the towering glass windows overlooking the harbor below. Hundreds of yachts floated like glowing islands in the dark water, while helicopters buzzed faintly above Monaco's glittering skyline. She stared at her own reflection in the glass. The diamond necklace around her neck felt heavier than usual tonight. Her smile was gone now. Maybe it had been gone for years. Somewhere behind the ballroom doors, another burst of applause erupted as Ethan took the stage for a charity speech she had secretly written for him 3 nights earlier while he slept in his office. Claire lowered her eyes slowly. Her phone vibrated once inside her clutch purse. A text message from Ethan's assistant appeared on the screen. Mr. Sterling is in the Skyview suite with Miss Vale preparing for the press interview. Claire frowned slightly. Vanessa Vale, the model from New York who had been following Ethan around the gala all evening with practiced smiles and expensive perfume. Claire told herself it was probably business. Branding. Publicity. That was how this world worked. Still, something cold settled deep in her stomach as she stepped toward the private elevator leading upstairs. The hallway outside the Skyview suite was quiet. Too quiet. Claire stood there for several seconds, staring at the gold room number while her pulse hammered softly in her ears. Then she heard it. Laughter. A woman's voice. Ethan's voice lower, softer, familiar in a way that made her chest tighten instantly. Her fingers trembled as she slowly pushed the door open. The city lights spilled across the suite in pale gold reflections. Ethan stood near the balcony doors, one hand resting against Vanessa's waist while she leaned close beside him, smiling up into his face. For a second, nobody moved. Ethan turned first. The color drained from his expression immediately. Claire, her champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered against the marble floor. But Claire never screamed, never cried, never demanded explanations. Somehow that made the moment even worse. Vanessa stepped backward awkwardly while Ethan moved forward quickly. This isn't what it looks like. The oldest lie in the world. Claire stared at him silently. At the man whose interviews filled Forbes covers. The man who donated millions to charities. The man who once promised he would never let her feel alone. And suddenly she realized something terrifying. She could no longer remember the last time he had truly looked at her. Ethan reached toward her carefully. Claire, please. But she stepped back before he could touch her. Her wedding ring caught the city light as she slowly pulled it from her finger. Ethan froze completely. Claire walked past him without another word and placed the ring beside the untouched bottle of champagne near the window. Then she looked at him one final time. Not with anger, not even heartbreak, just exhaustion. The kind that comes from loving someone long after they stopped noticing you were still there. And when Claire Sterling walked out of the Skyview suite that night, the entire world still believed she was the luckiest woman alive. Claire Sterling returned to the penthouse just after midnight, while rain slid slowly across the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Monaco harbor. The city below still glittered with parties, yachts, and camera flashes, but inside the $20 million residence, everything felt strangely hollow. She stepped out of her silver heels near the doorway and walked barefoot across the cold marble floor, her silk gown brushing softly behind her like a ghost. Ethan had not followed her home. Of course he had not. He would stay downstairs fixing the scandal before it became a headline by morning. That was what Ethan Sterling always did best. Damage control. Claire moved silently through the penthouse kitchen where untouched flowers from the gala dinner still sat arranged perfectly beside imported candles she never lit. The room smelled faintly of expensive wine and lilies. She stared at the massive dining table designed for 12 people and suddenly realized she could not remember the last time two of those chairs had actually been used by husband and wife instead of investors, celebrities, or politicians. A quiet laugh escaped her lips, but there was no humor in it, only exhaustion. She walked toward Ethan's office at the far end of the penthouse. The door stood slightly open, revealing shelves lined with awards, framed magazine covers, and glowing city lights reflecting against polished black walls. Forbes, Fortune, Time magazine. Ethan Sterling had built an empire before turning 40. People called him brilliant, visionary, untouchable. But Claire remembered the version of Ethan from before all of that. The man who once sat beside her on a cheap apartment rooftop in Brooklyn eating $5 pizza while promising they would never become people who cared more about appearances than love. Her eyes drifted toward a dusty cardboard box near the bottom shelf. She knelt slowly and pulled it closer. Inside were pieces of a life nobody saw anymore. Old photographs, movie tickets, handwritten notes, and beneath them all rested a worn leather sketchbook. Claire froze for a moment before carefully opening it. The first page held a charcoal drawing of Ethan asleep on their old couch years ago, long before private jets and billion-dollar mergers. Back then she still painted every day. Ethan used to call her his favorite artist. Her fingers trembled gently as she turned another page. More sketches, more memories. Tiny moments she had tried desperately to preserve while their marriage slowly disappeared beneath headlines and gala invitations. Then she noticed something else tucked between the pages. Letters. Dozens of them. Letters she had written to Ethan over the years, but never gave him. Claire pulled one free carefully. The paper was creased from being folded too many times. Her own handwriting stared back at her beneath the dim office light. Dear Ethan, I miss you even when you were standing next to me. Claire closed her eyes instantly. The ache in her chest deepened until breathing itself felt difficult. Somewhere across the city, cameras were probably still flashing around her husband while reporters praised his smile and charm. Meanwhile, the woman who shared his last name sat alone in silence reading love letters that had never been answered because they had never been seen. Her phone buzzed suddenly against the desk. The screen lit up with dozens of notifications exploding across social media. Photos from the gala were spreading everywhere now. Ethan laughing beside Vanessa. Ethan holding Vanessa's hand near the balcony. Ethan whispering into her ear. Claire stared at the images for a long moment before setting the phone face down without reading a single comment. Then slowly, almost mechanically, she reached for a blank sheet of paper beside Ethan's desk. The pen hovered above the page while rain tapped softly against the windows around her. And for the first time in years, Claire Sterling stopped trying to save her marriage and finally began writing the truth. The sun rose slowly over Monaco, washing pale gold light across the empty penthouse, while Claire Sterling sat alone at the kitchen counter, wearing the same midnight blue gown from the gala. The city outside was beginning to wake up. Delivery trucks rolled through narrow streets below. Yacht engines hummed softly across the harbor. Somewhere far beneath the tower, reporters were already gathering outside the hotel entrance hoping for another glimpse of Ethan Sterling after the whispers spreading online overnight. But inside the penthouse, time felt frozen. Claire had not slept. Sheets of paper covered the marble counter around her. Filled with handwritten lines, she kept rewriting over and over again. Some pages were tear-stained. Others had been crumpled and thrown aside beside untouched cups of coffee gone cold hours ago. Claire stared down at the latest page in silence while her fingers tightened around the pen. I kept waiting for the version of you that loved me to come back. Her chest ached the moment she reread the sentence. Slowly she crossed it out. Not because it was untrue, because it still sounded too gentle. The front door finally opened just after 7:30 in the morning. Ethan stepped inside looking exhausted, his tie loosened and his jaw tense from hours of crisis meetings downstairs. His phone was pressed against his ear. No comment until legal reviews the photos. He snapped coldly before hanging up. Then he saw her sitting there. The silence between them stretched instantly. Claire did not look up. Ethan loosened his cuffs slowly and walked toward the kitchen with careful steps, like a man approaching broken glass barefoot. "Claire," he said quietly. She kept writing. The scratching sound of her pen against paper filled the room. Ethan exhaled heavily. "I know how this looked." Claire laughed softly under her breath, but the sound carried no warmth at all. "You always say that," she whispered. Ethan stopped moving. Her voice sounded unfamiliar now. "Empty. Nothing happened," he insisted quickly. "Vanessa was drunk." The press caught a bad angle. Claire finally lifted her eyes toward him. Ethan felt something twist painfully in his chest because her expression was not angry anymore. Anger would have meant she still had energy left to fight for them. This was worse. This was someone emotionally finished. "Do you know what the saddest part is?" she asked softly. Ethan opened his mouth, but she continued before he could answer. "I actually believe you." He frowned slightly, confused. Claire stood slowly from the chair, the morning sunlight catching the tears she had tried so hard to hide. "I do not think you slept with her, Ethan." Her voice trembled faintly. "But somewhere along the way, you stopped protecting us." Ethan stared at her speechless. Claire walked past him toward the giant windows overlooking the harbor below. "You stopped seeing me as your wife," she continued quietly. "I became part of the image. Like the penthouse, or the charity galas, or the magazine covers." Ethan rubbed a hand across his face in frustration. "Claire, that is not fair." She turned toward him slowly. "Fair?" Her eyes glistened now. "Do you know how many dinners I ate alone in this apartment while your assistant texted me excuses? Do you know how many speeches I wrote for you while pretending not to care that you never thanked me?" Ethan looked away first, and that terrified him more than anything, because deep down, he knew she was right. Claire returned quietly to the kitchen counter and folded several pages together into a single envelope. Ethan watched her carefully now, unease creeping deeper into his chest. "What is that?" he asked. Claire sealed the envelope without answering. Then she wrote something across the front in neat handwriting. Ethan's heartbeat slowed instantly when he read the words. "Only open this if I never come back." The room fell completely silent. Somewhere outside, church bells echoed faintly through Monaco's morning streets while Ethan stared at the envelope in disbelief. "Claire," he said carefully, stepping toward her again. "What does that mean?" But Claire simply slipped off her wedding ring and placed it gently beside the letter. For a long moment, Ethan Sterling could only stare at the wedding ring resting beside the envelope while sunlight spilled across the marble counter like nothing in the world had changed. But everything had. Claire walked past him quietly toward the bedroom hallway, and something inside Ethan finally cracked with panic. "Claire, stop." His voice sounded rough now, stripped of the calm confidence investors and reporters were used to hearing. She paused but did not turn around. Ethan followed her slowly. "You are overreacting," he said carefully, though even he no longer believed the words. Claire laughed softly again. It was becoming the saddest sound he had ever heard. "That is the problem, Ethan," she whispered. "You still think this is about one night." She disappeared into the bedroom while Ethan stood frozen in the hallway. A minute later, he stepped inside after her and immediately stopped breathing for a second. Two large suitcases sat open across the bed, not packed in panic, packed carefully, methodically, like someone who had been planning this for a very long time. Claire folded another sweater into the suitcase without looking at him. Ethan's stomach tightened painfully. "How long?" he asked quietly. Claire zipped the suitcase slowly before finally meeting his eyes. "Long enough to realize I cannot survive this version of my life anymore." Ethan shook his head immediately. "You are talking like I destroyed our marriage." Claire's expression faltered slightly at those words. "No," she replied softly. "Marriages do not usually collapse all at once. They disappear little by little, quietly, one missed dinner at a time." Ethan looked away again because every sentence felt uncomfortably true. Claire moved toward the closet and removed a small storage box from the top shelf. Inside were photographs, old plane tickets, handwritten notes, and tiny pieces of a marriage that once felt real. Ethan recognized the faded photograph sitting on top instantly. Brooklyn, 10 years ago. Claire sitting cross-legged on the floor of their first apartment laughing while paint stained her hands blue. Ethan remembered taking that picture on a cheap disposable camera after they spent the entire night building bookshelves together because they could not afford furniture delivery. Back then they used to dream together. Somewhere along the way, Ethan had started dreaming alone. Claire held the photograph gently between her fingers. Do you remember when you used to wait outside my art gallery after work with coffee because you knew I skipped lunch? She asked quietly. Ethan swallowed hard. Claire, do you remember? When we promised success would never change us. Her voice trembled slightly now. Because I remember. The room felt unbearably still. Outside the penthouse windows, helicopters circled faintly over Monaco, while notifications exploded endlessly across Ethan's abandoned phone downstairs. The world was obsessed with the billionaire scandal unfolding online. But inside this bedroom, none of that mattered anymore. Ethan stepped closer slowly. I can fix this, he whispered desperately. Claire's eyes filled with tears for the first time that morning. That is exactly what scares me. Ethan frowned. Claire pressed a hand against her chest carefully, as though trying to steady herself. You always fix everything after it breaks, she said softly. But you never notice the damage while it is happening. Ethan opened his mouth again, but no words came. Because deep down he knew she was right. Claire moved toward the nightstand and reached for her passport. Ethan noticed something unusual then. The passport cover was worn, recently used. His pulse slowed instantly. You already planned this, he realized quietly. Claire said nothing. That silence answered everything. Ethan stared at her in disbelief while memories suddenly rushed through his mind all at once. The recent late-night walks alone. The quiet phone calls she ended when he entered rooms. The way she had started looking at ocean photographs online for hours. He had noticed all of it. He simply never asked why. Claire picked up the final suitcase and walked toward the bedroom door. Ethan instinctively stepped in front of her. Not angry, just terrified now. If you walk out that door, he whispered, I do not know how to get you back. Claire looked up at him with heartbreaking calmness. That is because you stopped looking for me a long time ago. Then she gently moved past him, leaving Ethan standing alone in the center of the room, while the life he thought would always wait for him quietly walked away. The private elevator doors closed softly behind Claire Sterling as she disappeared from the penthouse floor, and for the first time in more than a decade, Ethan Sterling felt completely powerless. He stood, motionless in the empty hallway, listening to the fading sound of the elevator descending through the tower, while panic slowly spread through his chest like ice water. Then suddenly he moved. Ethan rushed toward the elevator and repeatedly pressed the call button, but by the time the doors reopened downstairs, Claire was already gone. The hotel lobby buzzed with flashing cameras, luxury tourists, and exhausted event staff cleaning up after the gala. Ethan scanned the crowd desperately, ignoring the stunned expressions from employees as he pushed past them toward the front entrance. Rain had started falling again across Monaco, covering the streets in silver reflections beneath glowing hotel lights. Black cars lined the curb outside while reporters shouted questions the moment they recognized him. Mr. Sterling, is your marriage ending? Was Vanessa Vale involved romantically? Where is Mrs. Sterling? Ethan ignored every word. His eyes searched the street frantically until he spotted a taxi disappearing into traffic at the far end of the avenue. Inside the back seat, barely visible through the rain-streaked glass, sat Claire. Ethan stepped forward instinctively, but the taxi vanished around the corner before he could move another inch. He stood there in silence while camera flashes exploded around him like lightning. Somewhere behind him, publicists argued with reporters while security guards tried forcing photographers back behind metal barriers. But Ethan barely heard any of it anymore. All he could think about was the look in Claire's eyes before she left. Not heartbreak, not rage, acceptance. And somehow that terrified him most of all. Hours later, Ethan returned alone to the penthouse just before noon. The apartment no longer felt luxurious. It felt abandoned. Claire's favorite coat was gone from the hallway closet. The framed photograph from their first apartment had disappeared from the bedroom shelf. Half her books were missing from the living room. Ethan slowly walked through each room, noticing tiny absences everywhere now. A missing coffee mug, missing candles, missing paintbrushes from the guest studio she stopped using years ago. Claire had not packed like someone leaving temporarily. She had packed like someone reclaiming pieces of herself. Ethan loosened his tie and sat heavily at the kitchen counter where the sealed envelope still rested beside her wedding ring. Only open this if I never come back. The words felt heavier now. Ethan reached toward the envelope slowly but stopped himself at the last second. No, opening it would make this real. His phone buzzed violently across the marble surface again. Hundreds of notifications flooded the screen. News outlets, investors, friends. Headlines were already spreading across every major entertainment site in America. Billionaire marriage in crisis after Monaco scandal. Ethan Sterling spotted with model hours before wife vanishes. Hashtag Where is Claire had become the #1 trending topic online. Ethan threw the phone aside in frustration and buried his face in his hands. For years, he had controlled every narrative surrounding his life. Every article, every interview, every public appearance. But this felt different, because for the first time, he truly did not know where Claire was. The silence inside the penthouse became unbearable by evening. Ethan wandered into Claire's old art room, near the west side windows, almost without thinking. Dust floated through pale sunset light as he stared at unfinished canvases leaning against the walls. Most were abstract oceans painted in deep blues and grays. Lonely, restless, hidden beneath one canvas, Ethan noticed an old cassette recorder he had not seen in years. Curious, he pressed play. Static crackled softly through the room before Claire's voice suddenly filled the silence. Day 32, she whispered gently into the recording. Ethan froze instantly. Ethan missed dinner again tonight. He sent flowers this time. White roses. Beautiful flowers for a marriage quietly dying in a penthouse overlooking the sea. Ethan's breathing stopped. Slowly, painfully, he realized something devastating. Claire had not started disappearing yesterday. She had been fading away for years while he stood beside her, too distracted to notice. Rain continued falling over Monaco long after midnight, while Ethan Sterling sat alone on the floor of Claire's abandoned art room, surrounded by cassette tapes he never knew existed. One after another, he played them in stunned silence as Claire's voice filled the empty penthouse like echoes from a marriage already gone. Some recordings were soft and hopeful. Others sounded painfully lonely. Ethan promised he would take a weekend off next month, she whispered in one tape dated almost 3 years earlier. I know he means it this time. Ethan closed his eyes tightly. Another tape crackled to life. The investors changed the schedule again. He missed our anniversary dinner tonight. The restaurant still brought out the cake anyway. Ethan pressed his palm against his mouth as guilt twisted through his chest harder with every passing minute. The woman he thought would always wait for him had been documenting her heartbreak in silence while he buried himself deeper inside boardrooms, interviews, and billion-dollar deals. Around 2 in the morning, Ethan finally stopped the recorder and stared blankly out at the black ocean beyond the windows. His phone had not stopped vibrating for hours. News channels were now discussing Claire's disappearance nationwide. Some blamed Ethan. Others accused Claire of staging publicity for sympathy. Online detectives analyzed old interviews, searching for clues about their marriage. But Ethan barely looked anymore. None of them understood the truth. Claire had not disappeared because of one scandal in Monaco. She disappeared because she had been emotionally abandoned for years. Ethan stood slowly and walked toward the kitchen where the sealed envelope still waited beside her wedding ring. The sight of it made his chest tighten again. He picked it up carefully this time, turning it over in his hands beneath the dim pendant lights. Her handwriting looked calm, deliberate, as though she had accepted something long before he ever noticed danger approaching. Ethan opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single folded letter written on cream-colored paper. He unfolded it slowly while the city lights flickered faintly outside the windows. Dear Ethan, the letter began. If you are reading this, then I finally found the courage to leave before I completely disappeared inside this marriage. Ethan swallowed hard. His eyes moved lower across the page. I spent years trying to become the version of myself this world wanted beside you. Graceful, quiet, elegant, supportive. But somewhere along the way, I stopped recognizing the woman in the mirror. The saddest part is not that you hurt me. It is that I kept convincing myself loneliness was the price of loving someone extraordinary. Ethan sat down heavily at the counter as emotion tightened painfully in his throat. Outside, thunder rolled softly across the coastline. I do not hate you, Ethan. I know you never meant to destroy us. You simply became addicted to a world that rewards ambition and ignores absence. Every missed dinner became normal. Every apology became expensive flowers. Every lonely night became another sacrifice I told myself successful marriages required. Ethan's breathing slowed unevenly as memories flooded back all at once. Claire sitting alone at charity events while he took business calls. Claire smiling politely through interviews after waiting hours for him backstage. Claire quietly pretending not to care every time work came first. His eyes blurred slightly as he reached the final lines. By the time people notice I am gone, they will think I disappeared overnight. But the truth is, parts of me vanished years ago. I just finally stopped pretending everything was fine. Ethan lowered the letter slowly. Silence swallowed the penthouse once again. Then something else caught his attention inside the envelope. A small photograph. Claire standing beside a weathered wooden cabin near the ocean, bundled in an oversized sweater with paint stains on her jeans and wind-tangled hair. For the first time in years, she was smiling naturally. Real happiness. Ethan turned the photograph over carefully. Written on the back in Claire's handwriting were 5 simple words that made his heart stop instantly. I remembered who I was. 3 days after Claire disappeared, Ethan Sterling stood inside the glass conference room of Sterling Ventures while Manhattan investors argued around him about stock prices collapsing across international markets. Giant screens displayed financial charts bleeding red beside endless entertainment headlines about his marriage. Some shareholders wanted Ethan to release a public statement immediately. Others demanded legal action against media outlets spreading rumors. But Ethan barely heard any of them. His attention remained fixed on the photograph hidden beneath the folder in front of him. Claire smiling outside the small ocean cabin. Real happiness. Something he had not seen from her in years. Ethan, one board member asked sharply. Are you even listening? Ethan blinked slowly and looked around the room as though waking from a dream. Every face staring back at him looked irritated, nervous, calculating. The same world he had spent years building now felt strangely meaningless. Cancel the interviews, Ethan said quietly. The room fell silent. His public relations director frowned immediately. That would be a disaster right now. Ethan closed the folder calmly. Do it anyway. Across America, the internet had become obsessed with Claire Sterling. Old clips of her interviews resurfaced everywhere online. Millions watched her smiling politely while Ethan interrupted her mid-sentence during charity panels. Fashion blogs reposted photos of Claire standing alone at events while Ethan networked nearby with celebrities and investors. Then a short video leaked from the Monaco gala security cameras. Grainy footage showed Claire standing outside the ballroom balcony for almost 40 minutes completely alone while guests celebrated inside. At one point, she wiped tears from her face before forcing herself to smile again and walking back into the crowd. The internet exploded. Overnight, public sympathy shifted entirely toward her. She was lonely the whole time, one viral post read. Everyone saw a billionaire fairy tale except the woman living inside it. Ethan saw every headline, every comment, every accusation. But strangely, none of it angered him anymore because most of it was true. That evening, Ethan returned to the penthouse in Manhattan after canceling 3 business deals worth nearly $400 million. For years, he would have considered that unthinkable. Now he barely noticed. The apartment was painfully quiet without Claire. No soft music playing from her art room. No books left open on the couch. No scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen early in the morning. Ethan walked toward the windows overlooking Central Park while snow began falling lightly outside. Then his phone rang. Vanessa Vale. Ethan stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. Ethan, she said carefully, her voice unusually subdued. I just wanted to say, I did not know things were this bad between you two. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Neither did I. Silence lingered between them. Vanessa spoke again more softly this time. For what it is worth, Claire always looked at you like you were still the man she fell in love with. Even when you stopped acting like him. Ethan's chest tightened instantly. After the call ended, he wandered back into Claire's art room almost automatically. His eyes drifted across unfinished paintings until something near the back shelf caught his attention. A stack of postcards. Oregon coast. Cannon Beach. Newport. Astoria. Ethan's pulse quickened. Beside the postcards sat a small gallery receipt dated 2 months earlier under a different name. Clara Bennett. Ethan stared at it in disbelief before suddenly remembering Claire's maiden name. Bennett. His heart began pounding faster now. For the first time since she vanished, Ethan no longer felt helpless. Claire had not disappeared randomly. She had left breadcrumbs behind. Tiny, quiet clues hidden inside a marriage where she spent years unnoticed. Ethan picked up the Oregon postcard carefully. A handwritten quote appeared across the back in Claire's delicate script. The ocean does not apologize for taking up space. Ethan stared at the words for a long moment, while snow continued falling beyond the city lights outside. Then finally, after days of drowning in regret, Ethan Sterling made a decision that terrified him more than losing money, status, or public respect. He was going to find his wife. 2 days later, Ethan Sterling stood alone beside a quiet highway on the Oregon coast while cold ocean wind pulled at the collar of his dark wool coat. The sky above Cannon Beach stretched gray and endless, completely different from the polished glass towers and luxury hotels that had defined his life for years. Here there were no flashing cameras, no reporters screaming questions, only crashing waves and the distant cry of seagulls drifting through the salt air. Ethan looked exhausted. He had barely slept since leaving New York. His assistant had called 23 times during the flight about investors demanding answers and board members threatening emergency meetings. Ethan ignored all of them. For the first time in his adult life, finding Claire mattered more than protecting his empire. He stepped inside the small local art gallery holding the receipt he had discovered in her studio. Warm yellow light filled the modest space, while paintings of oceans and forests lined the walls. The scent of coffee and fresh paint lingered softly in the air. A woman around 60 looked up from behind the counter with a welcoming smile. "Can I help you?" Ethan hesitated before sliding the gallery receipt across the desk carefully. "I am looking for the artist who used this name," he said quietly. The woman adjusted her glasses and glanced at the receipt. "Clara Bennett." A faint smile touched her lips. "She rents the studio cabin near the cliffs." Ethan's heartbeat instantly quickened. "Is she here?" The woman studied him for a moment longer, recognition slowly appearing in her eyes. "You are her husband." Ethan looked away briefly. Even here, thousands of miles from New York, the scandal had followed them. The woman folded her arms gently. "That girl came here looking like someone who had forgotten how to breathe," she said softly. "But the ocean helped with that." Ethan swallowed hard. The woman finally scribbled an address onto a piece of paper and handed it to him. "If you love her," she added quietly, "do not come here trying to defend yourself. Come here prepared to listen." 20 minutes later, Ethan parked outside a weathered cedar cabin overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Wind whipped through tall grass along the cliffs while waves crashed violently against dark rocks below. The place was simple. Small. Porch. Faded blue shutters. Flower pots near the front steps. Nothing about it resembled the glamorous world Claire had walked away from. And somehow, Ethan immediately understood why she chose it. Through the cabin window, he spotted her. Claire stood near an easel wearing an oversized cream sweater and paint-stained jeans, her hair loosely tied back, while afternoon sunlight spilled across the wooden floor around her. She looked different, softer somehow, lighter. Ethan remained frozen outside the cabin for several seconds because for the first time in years, Claire looked alive again. Then the porch floor creaked beneath his shoes. Claire turned instantly toward the window. Her expression changed the moment she recognized him. Not shock. Not anger, just sadness mixed with exhaustion. Ethan stepped onto the porch slowly while his pulse thundered inside his chest. Claire opened the door before he could knock. Ocean wind rushed softly between them. Neither spoke at first. Ethan realized then how much he missed simply standing near her. "How did you find me?" Claire asked quietly. Ethan pulled the Oregon postcard from his coat pocket carefully. "You left clues everywhere," he admitted. Claire lowered her eyes briefly. "Maybe part of me wanted to be found." Ethan felt emotion tighten painfully in his throat at those words. He looked around the small cabin behind her. Canvases leaned against the walls. Open sketchbooks covered the table beside mugs of untouched tea. Soft jazz music played quietly somewhere inside. It was not luxurious, but it felt warm in a way their penthouse never had. Ethan looked back at Claire slowly. "I finally listened to the tapes," he whispered. Claire's face softened with heartbreak. Ethan took a shaky breath. "I heard every lonely night I ignored." The ocean roared behind them while tears gathered quietly in Claire's eyes. Then Ethan Sterling, the billionaire who once controlled every room he entered, finally said the one thing he had never truly admitted before. "I did not lose you in Monaco," he whispered brokenly. "I lost you years ago." The Oregon coast turned silver beneath the morning fog as Ethan Sterling stood outside Claire's cabin for what felt like forever. listening to the ocean crash violently against the cliffs below, while the woman he loved stared at him with guarded eyes from the doorway. Neither of them spoke at first. There was too much history standing between them now. Too many missed moments. Too many silent nights inside beautiful homes that never truly felt like home. Claire finally stepped aside quietly, allowing him inside the cabin. Ethan entered slowly, almost carefully, as though afraid he might break the fragile peace she had built here without him. The warmth inside surprised him immediately. The cabin smelled faintly of coffee, paint, and cedarwood. Sunlight filtered through soft linen curtains, while unfinished paintings rested against nearly every wall. Oceans, storms, lonely women standing near windows overlooking dark water. Ethan realized each canvas carried pieces of Claire he had failed to notice for years. Claire moved toward the small kitchen and poured hot tea into two mismatched mugs without asking if he wanted one. Somehow that tiny familiar gesture hurt more than anger would have. Ethan sat quietly at the wooden table while she placed the mug in front of him. Steam curled softly between them. "I almost did not come inside," he admitted after a long silence. Claire leaned lightly against the counter. "Why?" Ethan stared down into the tea. "Because I was afraid you looked happier without me." Claire's expression shifted slightly at those words. Outside the cabin windows, waves rolled endlessly beneath the gray sky, while the quiet jazz music continued playing softly in the background. Ethan looked around the room again before finally speaking the truth he had spent years avoiding. "I kept telling myself I was building a better life for us," he said quietly. "But somewhere along the way, I started building a life that no longer had room for us." Claire lowered her eyes slowly. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and carefully placed something on the table between them. Her wedding ring. Claire stared at it silently, while emotion flickered across her face. "I carried it with me the entire trip," Ethan whispered. "Not because I expected you to wear it. Again, I just could not leave it behind." Claire looked out toward the ocean for several long seconds before finally speaking. "Do you know what hurt the most?" she asked softly. Ethan shook his head. Claire's voice trembled faintly. "It was not the model. It was realizing I disappeared inside our marriage so slowly that even I stopped fighting for myself." Ethan felt his chest tighten painfully. "I know," he whispered, "and I hate myself for not seeing it sooner." Tears gathered quietly in Claire's eyes now, but she did not look away this time. Ethan continued carefully. "Back in New York, everything felt important. The company, the interviews, the money. Every deal felt urgent." He swallowed hard before looking directly at her. "Then you left, and suddenly none of it could fill a single room without you in it." Silence wrapped around them gently. Honest silence this time. Not the cold emptiness they once lived inside together. Claire slowly walked toward the window, overlooking the cliffs while wind rattled softly against the glass. "I do not know if I can go back to who we were," she admitted quietly. Ethan stood and joined her near the window. "Neither do I," he said honestly. "Maybe that is the point." Claire finally looked at him again. Ethan's voice lowered. "I am not asking you to forgive me overnight. I am asking for the chance to learn how to love you without making you disappear." Claire's eyes filled completely then, not because his words were perfect, but because for the first time in years, they felt real. Months later, a small art gallery opened quietly along the Oregon coast overlooking the Pacific Ocean. No red carpet, no press conference, just warm lights, ocean air, and paintings signed with Claire Bennett's real name. In the back corner of the gallery hung a framed handwritten letter beside a simple plaque. "Sometimes disappearing is the only way to finally be seen." And every evening, just before sunset, a man once worth billions could be found sitting quietly near the gallery window beside the woman he nearly lost forever, finally learning that love was never measured by wealth, power, or public admiration, but by whether the person beside you still felt seen when the world stopped watching.